You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record. On May 3, 2007, 3-year-old UK citizen Madeleine McCann went missing from the bed of her hotel room in Praia da Luz, Portugal. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, say they left the toddler with her 2-year-old twin siblings, alone and unsupervised, while they dined at the resort's tapas bar with their friends. What happened to Madeleine McCann has been subject for debate. It breaks up into two main camps. Those that believe Madeleine died by accident in 5A, and those that believe the parents' narrative, that Madeleine was abducted by a stranger. The Portugal police's investigation into the matter, also known as the PJ Files, has been public record since 2008. To speak with me about those files is Tom from the Facebook group 10 p.m. Praia da Luz. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Roberta. Thanks for having me back.
You're welcome. So what are the PJ Files and why are they important?
The PJ Files is the name given to the Portuguese police case files from their investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. There's over 11,000 pages of evidence comprising of photos, forensics, etc., statements. And when we go through the evidence today, what we'll see is that the evidence indicates beyond reasonable doubt that Madeleine McCann was not abducted, that her parents were untruthful to the Portuguese police in their statements about what happened that evening, and that what happened to Madeleine was covered up.
And the PJ Files gives a very different narrative as to what happened at dinner at the tapas bar before and after the alarm was sounded. One tapas bar employee, Svetlana Vetronio's statement, gives a different picture of what happened that night. Can you talk about that?
Sure, yeah. So this is kind of the big find since we spoke last August, I think it was. We found that she made a statement the day after Madeleine was reported missing by her parents. Just quickly to say what the parents say happened that night. They said they went to the tapas bar at 8:30. The Jerry McCann checked on the children at 9 p.m. Then Matthew Oldfield checked on the children at 9:30. And then Kate McCann discovered Madeleine missing at 10 p.m. So Svetlana's statement, which is very significant, she said that Jerry McCann left the table, and when he returned shortly after that, Kate McCann was the next person to leave the table. And shortly after that, the alarm was raised and everybody bar Diane Webster left the table.
Okay.
So she has completely different version of events, which is supported by other independent eyewitnesses. And what is very significant is the sequence of events in her statement. So there's no Matthew Oldfield check. There's no Jane Tanner sighting. The alarm was raised sometime around 9:20 p.m. And Jerry McCann then has no alibi for the Smith sighting, which we will go into later on in the discussion.
So couldn't we say, playing devil's advocate, Svetlana maybe misremembers? Are there other witnesses that support Svetlana's statement?
Yes, there are. And funny enough, they include Jerry McCann. So Svetlana saw Jerry leave the table and return, and Jerry McCann himself said this was around 9:10 to 9:15 p.m. It's in his statements. And then Svetlana says that Kate McCann was the next to leave the table, and then the alarm was raised. And Arlindo Pelagia, the executive chef, said that he heard the alarm raised around 9:20 p.m., which is 5 to 10 minutes after Jerry McCann returned to the table. And then Stephen Carpenter's wife said she heard Madeleine's name being called out in the night sometime before 9:30 p.m. So her statement is supported by other independent eyewitnesses, and we will go into that in further detail if that's okay.
Sure.
She's kind of like the missing piece of the puzzle that links the early alarm to the Smith sighting and the empty table and the staff in the Millennium receiving people at 10 p.m. looking for Madeleine. So what we have is an independent eyewitness timeline that stretches from 8:30 p.m. that evening to 1 o'clock in the morning. And if we start off with Stephen Carpenter, and I would like to just clarify again, as we did the last day, these are independent eyewitnesses. You know, you're in trouble with the police if you lie. So they signed all of these statements as being true. So we start off at 8:30, and Stephen Carpenter saw the McCanns arrive to the tapas bar. Svetlana then sees Jerry leave the table. We know that when Jerry was out, he bumped into Jez Wilkins. And Jez Wilkins put that sometime between 9:15 and 9:15. Jerry McCann himself says he returned to the table at 9:10 to 9:15 p.m. Then we have Svetlana seeing Kate McCann being the next person to leave the table. Erlindo Pelliger, as we just said a minute ago, the executive chef, said the alarm was sometime around 9:20 p.m. All of the Tapas 9 bar Diane Webster left the table then. And there's actually there's a very good reason why Diane Webster would have been left behind, because it seems kind of strange that her grandchildren were in one of the apartments and she just heard that one of the children was missing and she sat at the table. And obviously, if everyone had left the table, there would be nobody around to tell the staff what had happened. So it was kind of like Diane Webster was there to announce the alarm to the staff when they asked why did everybody run off. After this, then we have Stephen Carpenter's wife saying that she heard Madeline's name being called out in the night when they were walking home from the tapas bar sometime before 9:30. Erlindo Pelliger again says that the tapas table was empty around 9:40. And we also have another, Ricardo Oliveira, said the tapas table was empty around 9:45. We have the staff in the Millennium restaurant, which is a 9-minute walk away from the tapas bar. And 2 members of staff there, they said that several people, including an English tourist, entered there at 10 p.m. on the night that Madeleine was reported missing. So again, that's a 9-minute walk up the road and people are seen asking for Madeleine at 10 p.m. there. Then we come to the hugely important Smith sighting. 3 members of the Smith family said that they saw a man matching Jerry McCann's description carrying a child matching Madeleine McCann's description down Rua da Escola Primera, which is a 4 to 5 minute walk away from the McCann's apartments. And this happened at 10 p.m. But also there's more detail in that, as in the daughter, Aoife Smith, said that the man was possibly wearing beige trousers with buttons down the side. And lo and behold, if you go and search on the web, you will find pictures of Jerry McCann wearing beige trousers with buttons down the side. And Martin Smith, the father, said that the way the child was being carried was the same as when he saw Jerry McCann getting off the EasyJet flight several months later when they flew home from Portugal. The way he carried one of the twins was exactly the same as what he saw that night. This is happening around 10 p.m. So the narrative is that Matthew Oldfield twice went to reception to ask the police to be called. And the receptionist that night, Helder, said that they never received Matthew Oldfield at all into reception to have the police called. And the McCanns, they had mobile phones. They didn't start using them until after the police were called from main reception at 10:41. We then have Mrs. Fenn, and we discussed this the last day. She leaned over the balcony around 10:30 and asked what was going on, and Jerry McCann said to her, a young girl is missing. He never asked Mrs. Fenn, did she see or hear anything? And she was present in her apartment when the alleged abduction took place. It's very strange. Then we have another eyewitness, Graham McKenzie is his name, and he said he saw Jerry McCann on the phone around 11 p.m., kind of agitated and talking quite loudly into the phone, saying that Madeleine was possibly abducted by a paedophile gang. This is just, it's bizarre. At 10 p.m. we checked the phone records of the Tapas 9, and there is no calls to anybody outside the Tapas 9 until about 20 to 12 that night. So it appears that Jerry McCann was either using a phone that he never declared to the police, or he was making a phantom call so that he could just basically start putting it out there that Madeleine had been abducted by paedophiles. So we're at 11 p.m. and this is around the time that Sylvia Batista, I think is her name, she's the maintenance manager, arrived. And she said what really struck her that night was that they were pushing the abduction. All of the Tapas 9 just kept talking about abduction all the time, and they were busy being on their phones rather than actually being out looking for Madeleine. That's her statement. And then we have the PJ arrive around 1:45 in the morning. And there are the men at the table, and they're writing timelines when they should have been out on the streets looking for Madeleine. And at the table was Jerry McCann, Russell O'Brien, and David Payne. And Matthew Oldfield was not there. And guess where Matthew Oldfield was? He called to Jez Wilkins at 1:00 in the morning to ask Jez what he had seen. They were making inquiries behind the PJ's back to see what Jez had seen when he encountered Jerry McCann around 9:10 that evening. The next thing that was done is a huge indicator that there's something amiss here. is Jez offered to get changed and go out and search for Madeleine, and he was told that there was no need, he wasn't needed. So they turned down an offer from someone to go help search for Madeleine.
That's unusual. So why is the timeline so important in this case?
You can see that they all went in and made statements, and they all align. They all align in a row. And it paints a completely different picture to what the McCanns and the Tapas 9 said happened that night. We have Oldfield's check added to push the time of the alarm from 9:20, the actual time of the alarm, to 2:10 p.m., which would give Jerry McCann an alibi for the Smith sighting.
So the McCanns are saying that she was taken in this tiny window of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it makes the time extremely important in this case. Also, we have the Smith sighting at 10 p.m. of what they think, or that family thinks, was very much likely to be Jerry McCann carrying a child to the beach. So in this case, just listening, it sounds very obsessive, like, well, this person, this person, this person. But the timeline, I don't know of another case where the timeline is so important, because the McCanns are saying, like, this all happened I'm thinking of Kate McCann's interview where she says, whoosh, like that, it just happened. Like, it only took a second. So if it only took a second for this alleged abductor to come in and take Madeleine, the timeline becomes crucial.
Exactly. And Svetlana's statement is just so significant because it's the sequence of events, and it's supported by all the other eyewitnesses, even from the people up in the Millennium, that at 10 p.m. there were people up there already searching. Mm-hmm. The alarm could not have been 10 p.m.
And what does the PJ Files tell us about the behavior of the McCann and the Tapas 9 after the alarm was given?
Yeah, it's very bizarre. I would call them indicators that there was no abduction. So we start off with Kate apparently finding Madeleine missing at 10 p.m. And what she does, apparently, when she discovers the shutter and the window open, which nobody got to see because we'll go into that, Jerry McCann said he pulled down the shutter the minute he arrived after the alarm. But Kate, instead of pulling down the shutter or making sure the twins were okay, apparently she says she just ran back to the tapas bar, leaving the twins in a room that apparently their sister had been taken from with the shutter and the window wide open. It would indicate that she wasn't worried about the twins being abducted. Mm-hmm. And then we have the Tapas 9 say they all ran to the McCann's apartment when the alarm was raised instead of running to their own. So here we have all of these parents hearing that a child has been abducted from the building that their own children are in, and they all run to the McCann's apartment, which again indicates that they didn't think there was any danger to their own children. And parental instinct at that stage would probably drive most people crazy, that they would sprint to their own apartment and check that their loved ones were in their beds. Jerry McCann then says when he ran back to apartment 5A and he saw the window and shutter open, he said the first thing he did was he pulled down the shutter, which again is interfering with a crime scene for starters. And he went outside and tried to pull it up from the outside. Again, the fact that he didn't search the car park or the passageway outside the window or the stairwell or go to outside any of the other Tapas 9 apartments to see if Madeleine was there indicates that he knew she wouldn't be found on that side of the building. And what is also very interesting is that he broke the mechanism on a shutter and on another window earlier in the week. There's quite a few of these indicators, like the fact that Diane Webster just sat at the table after the alarm was apparently raised. She didn't even go to the entrance to the tapas and see if Madeleine was on the street somewhere or look around the tapas to see if she'd wandered off. She just sat at the table, which indicates that she knew that there was no point in looking. Jane Tanner had a friend from England staying in the Ocean Club as well at the other end near the Millennium called Charlotte Gorod. And the last activity on the Tapas 9 mobiles before the dinner that evening was a text sent from Jane Tanner to Charlotte Gorod. And what's interesting is that they were friends from the UK, is that there was no more contact until the next morning. Somebody recently raised this point that the most natural thing for a parent to do if you had a friend on site and a child in your company has gone missing was you would contact that other person and say, one of the children here has gone missing. Keep your loved ones close. There's something going on. No contact at all. Very, very bizarre. And no contact to even say to somebody just to tell them that somebody has gone missing from your company and maybe ask if one of the parents could help look for her. No contact whatsoever. Matthew Oldfield says that he went to reception twice. The receptionist certainly didn't receive him in to make a call to the police. The McCanns also said they searched the apartment. They said they searched under the beds and in the wardrobes, but they don't say anything about the sofa, which is where DNA that was a partial match to Madeleine was found. So the sofa was rammed right up against the curtains. And this area seems to be very sensitive because there's also a lamp in that corner that Oldfield said was on during his check. And it's off in the crime scene photos. And who's going to turn off a lamp after a child goes missing in a room, you know? We have the Mrs. Fenn and Jerry conversation where he never asks her if she saw or heard anything during the time frame of the abduction. We have the search of the beach. So the three men, other than Jerry, all have different accounts of the search of the beach. Russell O'Brien says he searched with Oldfield and Payne. Payne says he searched the whole beach on his own. And Oldfield is just very vague. He says he went down onto the beach and then back to the apartment. They were writing timelines when they should have been out searching. Sylvia Batista said they were pushing the abduction. And I think it's huge that Oldfield turned down Jez's offer to help search for Madeleine at 1 a.m., which was only 3 to 4 hours after she apparently had gone missing.
Right, and the McCanns never searched. I mean, we could make a...
Yeah.
I mean, that I always have a fantasy of making a very short Madeleine McCann episode and just say the parents never searched for her. End of story. I mean, I'm not saying it's that simple to make a judgment, but that point is so telling, at least to me. What do we know about Madeleine McCann on the afternoon of May 3rd, the day she went missing? And I know there's a very famous photo of her. When was that taken?
If we just walk backwards, we know the evidence indicates beyond reasonable doubt, with so many statements, that the alarm was earlier than the McCanns say it was, and there was no Oldfield check, etc. So huge problems with their account of what happened on the night. We brought this up briefly in the last podcast that there's an issue with Madeleine's whereabouts before bed. So they initially said that they followed the routine, which was that they would bring Madeleine to the playground before bedtime. And they changed that in subsequent statements that Madeleine was too tired to go to the playground, so she didn't go that evening. So we have two different accounts from the McCanns of where Madeleine was just before bedtime.
Okay.
So then if we look at the afternoon, and it actually starts with the last photo, this famous last photo. And there's huge issues around this photo because it was produced 3 weeks after Madeleine was reported missing, and it wasn't given to the police. You would have imagined that when they handed over photos to the police that this would have been an obvious photo to hand in, but it wasn't given to the police at all. It was just released to the public. There's also, many people have looked into the weather, seems to be off in the photo. So people think it couldn't have been taken at what they say is 2:29 that afternoon. And also that Jerry McCann seems to have a much heavier tan later that night than he has in the photo. But at 10 p.m, we're always very interested in time. So rather than tackling those other issues, we had a look at the time of the photo. And what's very interesting is the McCanns push very heavily that this photo was taken at 2:29 in the afternoon. They were on lunch at the time, so whether it was taken at 2 or 2:29, it doesn't really matter, but they're very insistent in interviews to say that this was taken at 2:29. So we're just wondering why. And we had a look in the PJ files, and the only thing that we could find that's around that time was that that's the time Ella O'Brien was signed into the creche. So this photo would be evidence that Madeleine was sitting at the pool while Ella was being signed in. So Madeleine was then supposedly signed in at 2:50 that afternoon. And we had a look at the creche sheets for each time her name was written into the sheet by her parents. So there's 10 entries. And what we discovered is that her dad, when he signed her in, he always wrote her name in capital letters. And when her mum signed her in, she always wrote in lowercase. But the entry on the day of the afternoon that she went missing, the last entry into the creche, Madeleine is spelt in upper and lowercase letters, which would indicate that there is an issue with whoever wrote Madeleine's name into the creche records that day. Moving on then, the McCann narrative is that they had a tennis lesson from 3:30 to 4:30, and then shortly after that Kate went for a run on the beach and passed Ella on the beach with her parents not long after they had collected Ella from creche. So we had a look at the tennis lesson in the PJ files, the evidence, and lo and behold, The tennis instructor says that the lesson was from 3 to 3:45, and this is backed up by the other tennis coach, Georgina Jackson. So this guy's name was Dan Stuck, and he said that I gave the McCanns a tennis lesson from 3 p.m. to 3:45 p.m. So here we have the McCanns shifting time so that they were engineering a situation where if Kate went for a run shortly after the tennis lesson, that she passed Ella on the beach. What Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner say is that Russell O'Brien collected Ella from the creche around 5 p.m. Another problem here is that Ella's name is signed out by the nanny, Kat Baker, at 4:30 p.m., half an hour before this. And then what they say is that Ella came down to the beach with her dad, and then when they all joined up, they went to the Paraiso restaurant, which is a restaurant on the beach, just shortly after 5 p.m. So we had a look at the CCTV footage from the Paraiso, and Jane Tanner appears on her own in the CCTV footage around 5:30, and Russell O'Brien does not appear on the CCTV until 5:52, which means that we don't know where Ella was during the high tea, which is the last time that Madeleine apparently was seen alive. So the evidence indicates that there was something going on that afternoon, because the evidence doesn't match up at all to what the Tapas 9 say happened that afternoon. If we move just slightly further back then, the McCanns have different accounts of what happened when they collected Madeleine from the morning session in the creche. Jerry McCann says he collected Madeleine at 12:30 using the shortcut. And Kate McCann says that she collected Madeleine with Fiona Payne at 12:30. So two completely different accounts of the last time they would have gone to the reception to collect Madeleine before she was reported missing. There's another photo then, a playground photo from the afternoon before. And when that was released, they said that the photo was taken at 5:15 in the evening. But the problem is that Madeleine was not signed out of the creche until 5:25, I think it was, that evening. So there's huge issues around all the accounts of what was going on before that evening.
We've talked about Smith Man.
Mm-hmm.
What are we referring to when we say Smith Man? What did Mr. Smith and his family see at 10 p.m. prior deluge? And why have newspapers reported that he's retracted his statements?
Well, we kind of went through this already, that they say they saw a man that looked like Jerry McCann carrying a child that looked like Madeleine down Rua da Escola Primera at 10 p.m. Yes, the Smith sighting is it's largely avoided in media for some reason, and it's a very significant sighting. And when we look at what the independent eyewitnesses say, it's certainly the evidence from their statements indicates that that was Jerry McCann very strongly.
Has he recanted his statement?
No, and this is the misinformation that's floating in the press around this case is astonishing. So there was a claim made in so many newspapers that Martin Smith had retracted his statement. But only last year he was interviewed in an Irish newspaper, and he says he stands over absolutely everything that he said. He's never changed his statement. What he said is what he stands by. It's very strange. The media do not report on the evidence in the PJ files. They will report on every single abductor that's or potential abductor that comes out. We've seen all different types, couples, everything, different nationalities, but they don't report on the evidence in the PJ files. And in fact, what we get people rubbishing the Portuguese investigation when you look at the evidence, it's very, very strong. It's almost like they're putting the public off looking in the files because the evidence is not good. But it is. And independent eyewitness statements are independent eyewitness statements no matter who takes them. We even had the couple that were involved in the Netflix documentary saying that it was ludicrous to even suggest that the Cans may have hidden Madeleine's body. But if you read the PJ files, which is the evidence, it's contrary to what they have to say.
And when you say the evidence isn't good, what do you mean by that?
We hear this a lot where it was a botched investigation and they didn't seal off the room and they weren't very professional. But it's quite the contrary when you look in the PJ files. And we've just gone through how many statements there. You can see it's very strong, the evidence.
In contrast, papers have spent a lot of time reporting on someone who does not appear in the PJ files, Julian Totman. When did he come forward and what is his story?
Yes, this is very interesting. He was a doctor that was on holiday in the Ocean Club when Madeleine went missing. And the evidence suggests that we know from Svetlana's statement that Jane never actually, she never saw anybody because she didn't leave the table. And I think we spent quite a bit of time going through, that nobody saw her leave the table. She wasn't seen by Jerry McCann or Jez Wilkins. She wasn't heard by them because she was wearing flip-flops. They never told anybody who was out searching that night that Jane had seen somebody. So lo and behold, this guy Topman appears after Operation Grange is set up, and he is supposed to be the man that Jane saw, but he would have been walking in the wrong direction to have been the man that Jane said she saw that night.
What do you mean the wrong direction?
Jane saw a man. She said she saw a man walking from west to east away from the McCann's apartment. But if Julian Topman was the man that she had seen and he was coming back from the creche, he would have been walking east to west across the junction at the top of the road.
Okay.
So the headline that was in the papers was, Maddie cops waste 4 years looking for, Tanner man. Again, this has just spiked our curiosity because Portuguese police investigation was only 15 months and then it was closed down. And here we have them saying 4 years. So we had a look at what he said about coming forward. So his wife spoke to the newspapers apparently and said that he went to the GNR, which is the local kind of police force, and gave a statement. But your great friend Isabel was telling me, and I think we brought this up as well already, that the GNR would not have taken a statement from Topman because once the PJ took over, they would have redirected anybody to the PJ to make statements. So that's quite unusual. He actually played tennis with Jerry McCann, so there was some sort of connection. And he obviously, from what we hear, he didn't go to the McCanns afterwards to say, I was carrying my child around that time or whatever. Then there was the photo fit, which was released in October. And Julian Topman is supposed to be this man. So he did this sketch that was released of Tanner Man in October. And with the release, there was a request from the McCann team to say, do you know this person? If so, please ring our confidential hotline. And Julian Topman thinks he's this guy, and he never rings the confidential hotline, it just seems very, very bizarre. And then we had the Cutting Edge documentary, which we'll go into later. That had a reconstruction of Jane's sighting, and he didn't come forward after that either. That was in 2009. Anybody watching that and they're still talking about Tanner Man, you would have expected him to come forward again. There was another opportunity which he didn't. So.
And he knows the McCanns.
He does, yeah.
So wouldn't you think he has a little bit of a vested interest in helping them find their kid?
Well, absolutely. And this is the problem with this case is for the narrative to work, it's like so many people have to go against human and parental nature. The man was carrying a child in just pajamas on a very cold night, okay? And Tanner Man or Top Man was supposedly wearing a jacket and long trousers and shoes on a holiday. So put it like this, to collect his child, he would have walked down the cold, it was cold that night, he's wearing a coat. He would have walked 5 minutes to the creche, and then he's telling us that he carried his child uncovered, with no socks on, in pajamas, for 5 minutes back to the apartment. She would have been frozen. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then the actual route that he would have been walking is very unusual because to come back from the night creche, you actually walk by the tapas bar. And this person said that they were walking along the top of the road. And again, we've already brought it up that he's walking in the wrong direction.
Right. And you just mentioned it. In 2009, Channel 4 came out with Cutting Edge. They're Cutting Edge, released a documentary called Madeline Was Here. How did they present the Smith sighting?
Well, there's huge issues around this because it was supposedly based on the PJ files. So there's the Smith sighting, there is Oldfield's check, Jerry McCann's check, and the Tanner sighting. So maybe if we could go into all of them because it's quite brief anyway, if that's okay.
Okay.
So the first thing that the program said was that they were all checking on each other's children, which is completely untrue. They were all doing apparently their own checks, but they weren't checking on each other's children. And they say that at 9:30 it was Matthew Oldfield's turn to check. Now we know from Svetlana's statement that his check never took place, and the other independent eyewitnesses that statements that support her statement. The program says 9:30 it was Matthew Oldfield's turn to check on the children. It wasn't his turn. He'd never checked on them before anyway. So it's not true. that particular statement from that programme. Then we have Jerry McCann's first two statements are conflicting in how he entered the apartment that night. So his first statement, he says he entered with a key through the front door. And then in his second statement, he said that he entered through the open, unlocked patio sliding door. And then in Cutting Edge, we see him walk up to the front door and open it with a key. So he's made two conflicting statements, and then he's entering using the key that he said in his first statement. With the Tanner sighting, what is interesting is that Jez says he crossed the road to talk to Jerry McCann. And Jerry McCann says he crossed the road to the other side, and this would enable Jane to pass by them behind. And the programme says that they were going to ignore that anomaly and not include it. But when you look, you can see Jez and Jerry talking on the opposite side of the road to where Jez says they were. And then if we come to the Smith sighting, which is hugely important, they displayed the wrong time on the screen for the Smith sighting. They displayed 9:50 when it's very clear from all the accounts from the Smith family that it was 10 p.m. They said it was a half a mile from the McCann's apartment, which is over 800 metres. The Smith sighting was only 400 metres from the apartment. They changed the way the child was being carried from the Smith statements. The Smith said that the child was being carried in an upright position with the head on the shoulder. In the Cutting Edge documentary, the child is being carried across the hands the same way that Jane Tanner said she saw the man carrying the child. So that's all misinformation. And then on top of that, Jerry McCann is, they just say that the Smith family thought it was Jerry, but this was being cleared by the Portuguese police. Jerry McCann doesn't go on camera to say that he was sitting in the restaurant at the time. I mean, it's very unusual. It's such a simple thing. He just had to go on camera and say, I couldn't have been Smith man because I was sitting in the restaurant, but he doesn't. He chose not to.
That documentary it's so telling. And, what I think most people remember about that documentary is, you briefly mentioned it, Jane Tanner saying I was here, and they're sort of arguing about where they were on the street. And Jerry McCann kind of takes over. It was like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When he was talking to Jez on the street. Matthew Oldfield has been also portrayed as a kind of the tragic figure who made a tragic mistake. And I know you've talked about this a little bit before, but what was his mistake?
He is portrayed that he's made this tragic mistake, but if you look at the events of the night, he is everywhere in the events. So he supposedly did a shutter check, a listening check of the shutters before Jerry McCann made his check. And again, problems here is that in their handwritten timelines, it says they were all assembled by 8:45 for dinner. And then he went off and did a shutter check, which meant that he purposely left the table to listen at the shutters. In subsequent timelines from the McCanns, they say that he left the table and met the Paynes, who still hadn't arrived at the table. He said that, I'll continue on and I'll go listen at the shutters. Then for Jerry McCann's check, he's over making inquiries at 1 a.m. in the morning as to, he told Jez that Jerry wanted to know what he'd seen. So what is Matthew Oldfield doing at 1 o'clock in the morning making inquiries that was up to the police to be doing? Again, then we come to, he's supposed to have offered and checked on the children just before 9:30 that evening. But we know from Svetlana and the other statements that it never happened. Then at 10 p.m., in his three statements, he has three different accounts of what he did when the alarm was raised. The first one was that he went to 5A, apartment 5A. He went into, and he was in the children's bedroom. The second account, the second statement, he said he went into the apartment 5A after the alarm, but he didn't go into the children's bedroom. And then in his third statement, he said that he just ran to the apartment and waited outside. Then we have him saying that he went to reception twice after the alarm to call police. They never received him in reception. And also, he said that Fiona Payne asked him to call the police, and Jerry McCann said he asked him to call the police. He has a different account of the search at the beach than the others. And also, shortly after the alarm, he says that he went to the Millennium and went in and asked he said that there was a little girl lost. Had anybody seen her? What's very interesting is that one of the staff said that an English man came in at 10 p.m. asking about a lost little girl. Same kind of statement. And when we look at it, more than likely the alarm was around 9:20 p.m. It could have actually been Matthew Oldfield that went in to the Millennium Restaurant at 10 p.m. So, to say that it is a tragic mistake is a bit of an understatement, because we also know from the cleaner statement the day before that Madeline's bed and the chest of drawers were swapped positions after the cleaner had been in. Madeline's bed was in a corner where somebody standing at the door doing a check at the door would not see whoever was in that bed. And the McCanns deny changing the furniture after the cleaner was in, but it's clear that the furniture was changed. So this is his tragic mistake, is that he stood at the door and he didn't see Madeline, if Madeline was in her bed or not.
Who printed the flyers advertising Madeline's disappearance?
Well, apparently it was Amy Tierney, one of the nannies, was at reception. What's interesting is she doesn't mention this to the police in her first statement given a few days after Madeline was reported missing. She said that she ran to the McCann's apartment after the alarm was raised and then was out searching with the rest of the staff for Madeline. And then a year later, she miraculously remembers that Russell O'Brien came to reception at 12 midnight, and that she went to her room, got her own printer, and printed 20 to 30 copies of that photo of Madeline so that the Tapas 9 could give them to the police. And each photo on the particular printer that she had would have taken up to a minute to print. So she would have been 20 to 30 minutes printing photos. And somehow, when talking to police, this slips her mind that she never mentions that she printed the photos that were given to the police that night.
I was just checking on Wikipedia to make sure that I remembered the dates right in this case. And I just had to laugh when I just read some of the content they were saying. It says on Wikipedia, over the following weeks, particularly after misinterpreting a British DNA analysis, the Portuguese police came to believe that Madeline had died in an accident in the apartment and that her parents had covered it up. So apparently, according to this Wikipedia, that this DNA was misinterpreted. And that's what all led to this whole confusion, not all the other things that we've talked about today. So what is the DNA? Where was it pulled from? What was it? And what did the report say?
Well, the first thing is that there was no DNA that could be attributed to Madeline in her bed where she was supposed to be sleeping, right? So there's no DNA where it should be. And we know when the dogs were brought in that they detected blood and cadaver odor behind the sofa and in the car that they rented 3 weeks later. So after the dog alerts then, there was DNA swabs taken and they were sent to the FFS lab in the UK for testing. And the report that was sent back, the final report, is very interesting because he even writes it at the start of his report. It says this report is a summary of the results. So they're not the results, they're a summary of the results. And there's several strange things about that. First is that the PJ they were entitled to get the results, not a summary of the results. And in the PJ files, there's no what's called electropherograms. They're the graphs of your DNA markers. They were not attached to this report. They're not in the PJ files. But there is one for when they tested for Madeline's DNA from the pillowcase earlier, around May. So this is September when this final report came from the FSS. What's also interesting is they redacted that 15 of Madeline's markers were found in the boot. That was in an email a few days earlier, but that was then redacted from this final report. They also didn't say, so there was 37 markers altogether. So there was 22 markers that weren't Madeline's from the boot, but they never said if it was if the rest of the family contributed to those 22 markers. So everything is very vague. And also, there was a partial match to Madeline from DNA lifted from behind the sofa. But again, he doesn't give a figure. Like, Madeline had 19 markers. And he doesn't say, like, a partial match could be 18 out of 19, which would be very high. We're just told that it was a partial match. Again, very vague, very vague. And it was a summary of results, as it says in the report, not the results themselves.
That's very much like Operation Grange and their remit. Can you talk about that?
This blows me away completely. The remit of Operation Grange is to investigate abduction as if it happened in the UK. So this obviously excludes the parents, for starters, from their investigation. On top of that, then, the car that the McCanns rented, they rented it 3 weeks after Madeline was reported missing. And this obviously means that Operation Grange are not going to investigate that because it was 3 weeks after, so that would not be a part of an abduction narrative. It means also they can ignore Dr. Perlin's offer to retest the DNA from the boot because that's not investigating abduction. It means they can also ignore any evidence that points to Jerry McCann possibly being Smithman, because again, that's not investigating abduction. It means that they are quite entitled to every year pull out a new suspect to say this is possibly the abductor, because that's their remit, and their remit is to investigate and find an abductor. So they're quite entitled to wheel out these possible abductors, and they're quite entitled every year to request funding because they're following their remit. So what really needs to be done is Operation Grange needs to be shut down and a full, proper investigation into her disappearance set up.
Why do you think the press doesn't want to report on the PJ files?
They don't. They will report on everything else but what's in the PJ files. We went through the independent eyewitness statements, the timeline, and they all indicate that Madeleine wasn't abducted.
Mm-hmm. And this is not unusual for this kind of case. This kind of conclusion is not unusual, I guess, that we're making, that the parents covered it up. So what's the future of this case, and how can the public get justice? You mentioned the closing down Operation Grange. How can the public get justice for Madeleine?
Madeleine was a 3-year-old girl and a UK citizen, so she deserves a proper investigation into what happened to her. And we have this evidence in the PJ files that's been sitting there since August 2008, and the public themselves need to wake up and look at what's going on. You know, I say the PJ files are a gift. They're a window into what happens in the world. Every year, millions of children go missing or disappear. And let's put it that sometimes the disappearance goes wrong and it's covered up, and it can involve elected officials, law enforcement, people in well-to-do jobs. So what really needs to happen is that a full, proper investigation needs to be launched, and people need to familiarise themselves with the evidence that's not being reported on in the PJ files. Like, go to 10pm and read the analysis, read the files themselves, join a group. There's so many great admins out there. You'll get talking about the case and get to know the actual facts of the case, not the stuff that you're reading in the media.
These statements were taken at the time of Madeleine's disappearance.
Very good point.
So, the press is trying to present these sort of new suspects as more likely when we have all this evidence that was taken at the time, not 7-8 years later.
All of those statements that we mentioned earlier, these are people that were there, like they're in the Ocean Club.
With no reason to lie. I mean, I'm talking about the independent eyewitnesses. They have no reason to lie.
Well, not only that, we mentioned this before, that wasting police time, especially in the case of a missing child, is a very serious offence. You're talking about prison. And these people went in at different times and their statements line up. It's quite incredible.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence in the PJ files indicates beyond reasonable doubt that Madeleine McCann was not abducted.
Mm-hmm. Tom, where can people find you?
Again, just look for the 10pm page on Facebook. We're also on Twitter.
Okay. And did we miss anything?
I'd just like to say thanks so much, Roberta, for having an interest in the case and for asking us back on to your show. And I would like to thank Isabel. Again, she's very knowledgeable and very generous with her knowledge of the case.
Isabel McFadden.
Your friend, yeah.
Yes.
There's another account, Bob's One, as well, who has been sending us some information. And then the public figures, I have to say, like Sonia Poulton, Mark from the Maddie podcasts, Peter Hyatt and Pat Brown. These are public figures that have really fought for justice for Madeleine, and they put their head above water. And I think they deserve much credit for what they've done.
Agreed.
I think it's very important that people listening to your podcast share the whole episode and to share the independent eyewitness timeline and Svetlana's statement. Share it with your friends, send it on to local media, independent reporters, whoever, and get this timeline out there. I think it's really going to serve as helping to get justice for Madeleine.
And where can they find that timeline?
Just go to 10pm on Facebook.
10 p.m. Praia da Luz?
Praia da Luz.
Okay. All right.
It's time for a proper investigation in what happened to Madeleine McCann.
Agreed. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberta.